Deep within every human being lies a presence that remains unseen, unnamed, and often feared. It is the shadow, the part of the self that does not conform, that does not shine, that does not obey the ideals imposed by society, family, or even our conscious mind. It is formed in silence, constructed not through malice, but through neglect. The shadow grows each time we disown a thought, dismiss an emotion, deny a desire. It is not evil by nature. It becomes dangerous only when ignored. In truth, it is not the monster beneath the bed. It is the self beneath the mask. The moment a child learns that certain emotions are bad, a fracture begins. Anger must be hidden. Sadness must be suppressed. Power must be controlled. Sexuality must be silenced. Sensitivity must be armored. Every time the world tells us this part of you is unacceptable, and we comply for the sake of love, safety, or survival, that part does not disappear. It retreats inward into the dark basement of the psyche. There it waits, it watches, it remembers, and it does not die. It only grows more primitive, more autonomous, more foreign. The shadow is not only individual, it is collective. Cultures, too, have shadows. Societies disown what they cannot integrate. They create enemies, outcasts, scapegoats, and taboos. The person who represses their shadow becomes a citizen who participates in this disowning, projecting onto others the very traits they are unwilling to face within themselves. The man who suppresses his vulnerability ridicules it in others. The woman who hides her anger becomes suspicious of assertiveness in another. Projection becomes the unconscious strategy to escape confrontation with the self. But what is not faced internally will always return externally, through conflict, crisis, and collapse. Yet the shadow is not only darkness. It contains the gold we lost in childhood, the boldness, the creativity, the wildness, the instinctual knowing that was sacrificed to be accepted. Often, our deepest talents lie dormant in the shadow, wrapped in shame or buried beneath years of repression. To reclaim the shadow is not to glorify destructive behavior, but to reintegrate the raw materials of life. It is to retrieve the soul, fragments that were cast off when we believed they made us unworthy. The shadow is not against us. It is the part of us that remembers who we were before we were trained to forget. Encounters with the shadow often arrive unannounced. A sudden burst of rage, a dream filled with violence, an irrational jealousy, a slip of the tongue that reveals more than it conceals. These are not accidents, they are eruptions. When the shadow breaks through, it does so with power because it has been denied voice for so long. To the ego, it feels like invasion, but to the soul, it is liberation. The eruption is a call, not to repress further, but to listen more deeply. What is this feeling trying to say? What part of me have I neglected? The modern world offers countless ways to avoid the shadow. We stay busy, we stay numb, we curate lives that are clean, optimized, and filtered. But beneath the surface, the shadow festers. It leaks into relationships, into addiction, into self-sabotage. We wonder why we repeat patterns, why intimacy feels dangerous, why our lives seem hollow despite external success. The answer lies in the part of the self we have locked away. Until it is acknowledged, no true healing can occur. The split self will always pull against itself. The war is not out there, it is within. To begin the shadow work is not to fix oneself, it is to become whole. Wholeness does not mean light without dark, or good without bad. It means the capacity to hold opposites, to navigate complexity, to say, "This too is part of me." It requires a different kind of courage, the courage to turn inward, to see what has been hidden, and to sit with it without judgment. The shadow does not seek punishment, it seeks relationship. It wants to be seen, named, and integrated, not so it can dominate, but so it can transform. Symbols and dreams often reveal the shadow more clearly than language. In dreams, the shadow may appear as an intruder, a wild animal, a dark figure chasing us through corridors. These are not nightmares, they are invitations. The psyche is asking us to face what we fear, to turn toward what we've avoided. These symbols are not literal. They are metaphoric reflections of our inner division. The monster at the door may be the grief we never allowed, the passion we repressed, the authenticity we buried to be good. And in facing it, we do not destroy it, we reclaim it. The path to reclaiming the shadow is not a single event. It is a continuous inner dialogue. We begin by noticing what we judge most harshly in others. We pay attention to our overreactions. We reflect on the stories we tell ourselves about who we are and who we are not. We ask, who would I be if I allowed this hidden part to speak? What part of my soul have I exiled in order to be loved, accepted, or safe? These are not easy questions, but they are the questions that initiate transformation. They draw us out of performance and into authenticity. They open the door to the repressed self waiting patiently in the dark. There exists within every individual a concealed battlefield, not between nations, tribes, or ideologies, but between the face we wear for the world and the rejected self that lives beneath it. This conflict, though silent, governs nearly every decision we make. It is not merely psychological in the modern sense, but mythological, primordial, echoing through the soul like an ancient rhythm whose beat we've forgotten yet still follow. The persona is the mask we wear to meet the expectations of society. It is our social self, meticulously shaped by parents, teachers, friends, religions, and institutions. It is not inherently false, but it is incomplete. Over time, the persona hardens like a shell, a public, facing facade that rarely reflects the full complexity of who we are. It is curated, filtered, polished not unlike the roles in a play. We present what we believe is acceptable, lovable, or admirable. We bury the rest, and what happens to what we bury? Enter the shadow, the psychic repository of all that has been exiled from conscious identity. It contains traits we consider shameful, weak, immoral, or dangerous. But paradoxically, it also holds unrealized power, creativity, and truth. The shadow is not evil. It is simply the unacknowledged, and what remains unacknowledged begins to take on distorted shapes. Like a child abandoned in the dark, it learns to survive in twisted forms through sabotage, projection, addiction, jealousy, manipulation, or depression. The war between persona and shadow is not an abstract metaphor. It manifests every day. It appears when we betray our own values to be liked, when we erupt in anger at others for traits we secretly fear in ourselves, when we lose control in moments of stress, or when we feel inexplicably empty even in the midst of success. The outer conflicts in our lives, broken relationships, failed careers, spiritual dryness, are often expressions of this inner schism. The world merely reflects the war within. This is not a modern problem. The ancient myths tell of it again and again. The Greek Narcissus, so enchanted by his own reflection, dies staring into the image of his persona. Dr. Jekyll creates Mr. Hyde, not realizing they are the same being. Christ wrestles in the desert with the devil, a projection of the human shadow. These are not external dramas, but interior journeys encoded in symbolic form. And unless we recognize ourselves in them, we remain trapped in the story's tragic half. To live purely within the persona is to live a half-life. It is to become what the world wants and forget what the soul requires. But facing the shadow is no small task. It requires descending into the underworld of the psyche, into dreams, fears, memories, and long-buried emotions. It is painful, humbling, and often frightening, but it is also liberating, for only by confronting the rejected parts of ourselves can we begin to live as whole beings, not split into the acceptable and the hidden, but united in authenticity. Modern culture, obsessed with image and performance, encourages us to build stronger personas to market ourselves, brand ourselves, and refine our digital masks. There is little guidance for descending into the interior abyss. Yet every spiritual and psychological tradition of depth, from the desert mystics to indigenous shamans to alchemical philosophers, insists on one principle: you must face what you fear inside yourself. The monster in the cave is guarding the treasure you seek. The dragon is not only your enemy, it is your initiation. In relationships, the tension between persona and shadow plays out in projection. We unconsciously attribute our disowned traits to others, calling them selfish, arrogant, weak, or manipulative, when these are precisely the elements we refuse to see in ourselves. This is why romantic partnerships, close friendships, and even parent-child bonds often erupt with unexpected intensity. We are not merely arguing with a person. We are wrestling with the unlived dimensions of our own psyche. Until we withdraw these projections and integrate them, we will be haunted by them, chasing the same conflicts in different costumes. The shadow is not integrated by denial or suppression, nor is it integrated by indulging in its raw forms. It is tamed by attention, by honest reflection, and by symbolic exploration, especially through dreams, active imagination, art, writing, and deep dialogue. What begins as darkness eventually reveals a light hidden within. For what we reject does not disappear. It waits patient, potent, and silent to be welcomed home. The psyche does not speak in logic, grammar, or empirical certainty. It speaks in symbols. A symbol is not merely a sign or an abstract representation. It is a living vessel, a bridge between the known and the unknown, the conscious and the unconscious. Where language breaks down, symbols arise. They appear not only in dreams but in myths, religions, art, and even the repetitive patterns of our lives. They are not invented by the ego, but emerge from a deeper place, an interior source that seems to operate beyond our will, yet through our being. Symbols are not to be confused with signs. A sign points to something singular. A red light means stop. A skull signifies poison. But a symbol opens into layers. It cannot be exhausted by explanation. Take the image of the serpent. In one context, it is temptation, deception, and evil. In another, it is wisdom, rebirth, and healing. In yet another, it coils around the staff of Hermes, signifying medicine and the caduceus. The same symbol, emerging across cultures, speaks in paradox because it touches the infinite. It holds opposites in tension, just as the soul does. The unconscious mind does not operate in linear time. It speaks through images, associations, and archetypes, timeless patterns embedded in the collective soul of humanity. When we dream of water, we are not simply dreaming of liquid. We are confronting the depths, the womb, the ocean of feeling, the unknown realm where ego control is lost. A house is not just a structure, it is the architecture of the self. A falling tooth is not just an odd event. It may indicate loss of power, fear of aging, or unspoken guilt. Every image is a message from the deep. Symbols arise not only in dreams, but in synchronistic events, in moments that seem to defy randomness. A raven lands before us after a painful conversation. We begin seeing the same number everywhere. We repeatedly hear a certain song during periods of transformation. These are not accidents. They are eruptions of meaning from the unconscious, moments when the inner world and the outer world align, not through causality but through meaning. These events, often dismissed as coincidence, are the psyche's way of catching our attention. They ask us to pause and listen. Many people ignore their symbols. They laugh at their dreams, suppress their intuition, and focus only on the material. But without symbols, the inner world dries up. We become purely functional beings, machines of routine, cut off from mystery. A life without symbols is a life without myth. It is flat, shallow, and spiritually malnourished. Yet the symbols never stop appearing. If not in dreams, then in art, in obsessions, in illnesses, in irrational behavior. The psyche insists on being heard, and when it is ignored, it does not disappear, it rebels. To engage with symbols is to open oneself to transformation. Not because symbols change us directly, but because they allow the ego to enter into dialogue with the unconscious. The conscious mind, for all its cleverness, sees only a fragment of reality, but the symbolic mind sees with deeper eyes. It understands that truth cannot always be spoken. It must be intuited, danced with, lived into. That is why rituals exist. That is why sacred stories endure. They do not tell us what to believe. They show us how to journey. When a symbol is encountered authentically, it carries a psychic charge. It stirs emotion, memory, and mystery. This is why ancient initiation rites, sacred art, and religious visions often involve overwhelming images, masks, fire, labyrinths, sacred animals, blood, stars. These images break through the barriers of rationality. They initiate the soul into a deeper order. In modern life, we are rarely granted such images in communal form, but the inner world continues to initiate us through dream work, meditation, imagination, and the symbolic understanding of life events. To see symbolically is to awaken. One of the most profound human tasks is to translate the symbols of the soul into conscious awareness. This is not about decoding them like riddles, but about relating to them. We must sit with our dreams, not solve them. We must reflect on patterns, not dismiss them. We must ask not only what is happening in our lives, but what it means in the myth of our soul. A divorce, a job loss, an illness. These are not just events. They are thresholds, and every threshold is guarded by a symbol, waiting to be understood. The symbolic life is not reserved for mystics or artists. It is available to anyone who dares to listen. It begins when we ask, what is this dream telling me? Why does this image keep appearing in my journal? Why am I drawn to this animal, this poem, this memory? Why does this emotion feel ancient, like it belongs to something larger than me? These questions are the beginning of dialogue with the deep self. The unconscious does not shout. It whispers. It hides in metaphors, patterns, and signs. But once we begin to listen, to truly listen, everything becomes radiant with meaning. Life becomes more than a series of tasks and trials. It becomes a symbolic journey, and we begin to understand that the external world is a mirror of the inner one. There comes a moment in every inner journey when the fragmented parts of the psyche, long scattered across time and trauma, begin to call out for reunion. This is not the pursuit of perfection, nor is it the eradication of weakness. It is the process of individuation, the slow, spiraling movement towards psychological wholeness. It is not a goal achieved, but a path walked. And it demands not the ascent of the ego, but the reconciliation of opposites within the self. In this sacred work, the conscious mind must open itself to the vast, uncharted terrain of the unconscious, not to dominate it, but to integrate it. Individuation is the process by which a person becomes who they truly are, not who they were told to be, not who they pretend to be, but who they are at the level of essence. It begins with conflict. The soul stirs when the mask of the persona grows too tight, when the rituals of conformity no longer satisfy, when the individual feels the subtle ache of inauthenticity. At first, this ache is denied, rationalized, avoided through distraction. But it returns, and each time it returns, it carries a deeper message, that the life one is living is out of alignment with the life one was meant to live. This realization is not pleasant. It is the beginning of a psychic descent. The first act of individuation is often a crisis, a confrontation with the shadow, an emotional breakdown, a collapse of identity, or a spiritual void. These dark nights of the soul are not interruptions to life's journey. They are initiations into it. They are the thresholds at which the old self must die so the fuller self can be born. In mythology, this is the moment the hero is called into the underworld. In life, it may come as depression, confusion, or the haunting sense that something is missing. But the journey inward is never linear. It winds through forgotten memories, buried emotions, discarded dreams. It demands that we face the figures we have cast out, the angry child, the jealous sibling, the vulnerable lover, the hungry seeker. These inner figures live within us still, shaping our behavior in ways we cannot see. To individuate is not to eliminate these parts, but to know them, listen to them, and give them a voice in the council of the self. Each rejected part contains something vital, something that once was silenced to ensure survival, but now must be recovered to ensure wholeness. The path of individuation also requires a confrontation with the inner masculine and feminine, the animus and anima, which exist in all human beings regardless of gender. The animus is the inner logos, the structure, giver, the force of clarity, reason, and direction. The anima is the inner eros, the container of emotion, mystery, and connection. When these inner polarities are repressed or projected outward, we become split, either overly rational and cut off from feeling, or emotionally reactive and unable to act with purpose. Individuation invites these forces to meet within us, not in conflict, but in sacred union. Dreams play a vital role in this process. They are the messengers of the unconscious, offering symbols and guidance when the ego is most vulnerable, during sleep, when its defenses are lowered. Through dreams, the unconscious speaks of where we are wounded, where we are blocked, and where new energy is waiting to be born. The more we attend to our dreams, the more we realize that the soul has its own language, one that does not follow the rules of reason, but speaks in images, paradoxes, and transformations. To walk the path of individuation is to become a translator of these inner messages. Myths, too, become mirrors, not because they offer literal truths, but because they reflect the universal dramas of the soul. The descent of Inanna into the underworld, the trials of Hercules, the death and rebirth of Osiris, all are stories of dismemberment and restoration, loss and return. They echo the process by which the psyche undergoes fragmentation and slowly weaves itself back together. The myth is not outside us, it is the map of the inner terrain, and each life, in its deepest truth, is a myth being lived out in real time. Individuation is marked by symbols of transformation, alchemical processes of dissolution and coagulation, death and renewal, burning and rebuilding. The phoenix must turn to ash before it rises. The caterpillar must liquefy before it becomes the butterfly. These are not poetic flourishes. They are accurate depictions of the psychic process. When old structures of belief dissolve, it feels like dying. But something deeper is trying to live, something that was long imprisoned beneath layers of fear, obedience, and self-forgetting. To walk this path requires courage, solitude, and patience. The ego will resist, fearing the loss of control. Society will push back, fearing the loss of conformity. But the soul is not interested in safety. It seeks meaning. It seeks coherence between the inner world and the outer life. It seeks to become itself, not as a fixed identity, but as a living, evolving mystery. Individuation is not a one-time event. It is a lifelong process, a spiral that deepens with every turn, and so the journey does not end, it unfolds. To walk the path inward is not to escape the world, but to meet it with eyes that have seen beneath the surface. When we begin to understand the tensions between who we appear to be and who we are beneath the mask, when we learn to hear the symbolic language of dreams, chants, and myth, when we dare to confront the forgotten, the unloved, and the hidden, something ancient stirs awake within us. The soul remembers. Wholeness is not perfection. It is not the achievement of a flawless self, free from pain or contradiction. Wholeness is the weaving together of all that we are, the light and the shadow, the reason and the instinct, the conscious and the unconscious. It is the radical act of no longer abandoning any part of the self. And when that integration begins, life itself changes. We no longer move like fragmented characters reacting to forces beyond our understanding. We begin to participate in a deeper story, one written not in words, but in symbols, patterns, and sacred repetition. The work is not easy. It asks more than belief. It asks attention. It asks humility. It asks us to descend before we can rise. But in this descent, we reclaim the parts of ourselves that once lived in silence. We become more than performers in a social drama. We become carriers of something eternal. The soul does not seek applause. It seeks truth, and truth lives not in appearances, but in the quiet center where all opposites meet. This is the task, this is the call, not to become something else, but to remember who we have always been, waiting behind the mask, speaking in symbols, dreaming through us in the night, calling us, again and again, back to ourselves.